Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by our lovely host, Codility. So big shout out to Codility. And before I introduce this incredible panel, my name is Katrina Kibben. I'm the founder and CEO of threeearsmedia. We are a recruitment marketing creative agency, and we help people create better candidate experiences. So I am your host today for this conversation with three people who are actively creating candidate experiences. From my perspective, and I've done a handful of webinars at this point in my life, candidate experience is so often contextualized by failure, right? We talk about candidate experience and how it's broken and how we don't do enough and we don't communicate enough. And it just, every webinar about candidate experience is about how something is busted. And today's webinar isn't like that. And so I'm really glad you're here because we're going to talk about how you can make it your competitive advantage instead of sitting here and spinning on all the ways that it's broken. So we will be using hashtag Codility as we're tweeting if you'd like to tweet along. And now I want to introduce these incredible panelists. So Wojtek, I would like you to go first and tell people who you are and what you do.
So hi everyone, I'm Wojtek Erbetowski from Codility. And I'll be happy to share some of my ideas about hiring. Keep in mind that I'm a technical person. I'm a CTO at Codility. But since Codility is about recruiting technical people, so I'm also involved a lot in product development. And this is really close to my heart because I've been hiring mostly developers for over 10 years right now. So I'm really glad I can put some of my ideas into the product as well. Hi.
Absolutely. How about you next, Ellie?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellie Purdy. I am a recruiting coordinator at Namely, which is an all-in-one HR software. I've been there for about a year, and candidate experience is what I focus on every single day. So I'm excited to share some of the things that we do and talk about some more ideas because we need some more always.
All right, Mr. Fink, you're up next. We've done this rodeo a few times. Tell these folks who we are.
Hey, my name is Brian Fink. I'm a senior technical recruiter with RentPath in Atlanta, Georgia. You may know us by some of our different web brands that we have that connect consumers to the apartments they're looking for, like rentals.com, rent.com, Lovely, and also the Apartment Guide. I'm focused on making sure that every technical candidate who comes to have a conversation with RentPath, whether it's just the very beginning of the conversation all the way through offer and acceptance, that they have a great experience, and once they come here that they're empowered to empower other people to create such an experience for potential candidates.
Absolutely. So thanks to all of you for being here. So if anyone else is tweeting along, he is at the Brian Fink. I'm at Katrina Kibben. The company's at threeearsmedia, and they will be live tweeting. And the second thing, and of course, at Codility. The second thing I want to cover is asking questions. So I don't like waiting until the end. I think if we're talking about something and we can answer your question in the moment, ask your question. Please don't be shy and don't be patient. You don't have to wait for the right time. Just ask, and I will personally make sure that your question absolutely gets answered. So the first thing I want to do is set some boundaries on how each of us define candidate experience, where it starts, and where it ends. Because sometimes I think when we go into this, we don't set that tone, and it either is really way more broad than I might be expecting or way smaller. So let's start with you, Ellie. So when we talk about candidate experience, when does it start and when does it kind of transition into the next stage for you?
Sure. To us, we really focus on when the candidate finds our brand first. So whether that's our website or an employment website, it's when they first see Namely's logo and learn about it. And then it's all the way to the first day when they have breakfast and bagels and coffee with their new hiring manager, their hiring manager who is turned into their manager. So it's awareness to the end when they're finally on site.
How about you, Fink? Do you agree?
I agree with a lot of that. I think, though, that the key point, though, that Ellie brings up is their first experience or recognition with the brand. That's why when I'm out and about, whether I'm at a hacker conference, like I just came back from, when I'm wearing that t-shirt, that I'm making sure that I'm inviting and that I'm really kind of extenuating all the different circumstances that surround our brand, who we are, and what we want to drive for a conversion. Also, I think it's important to remember that we're in the space where anyone who is a potential applicant is also a potential consumer, and we want to make sure that we're not turning away anybody from using our tools or our products in the future. And at the same time, we want to make sure that if they're using our tools and our products to find their apartments, that they're having a great experience, which might lead them to say, hey, I'd love to work there to make sure that other people are having this experience. So with us, it kind of begins at the buying funnel when a person is looking for their apartment as well.
Interesting. I mean, I've heard the line about every candidate could be your next best customer, but I think that's especially true in your case because a home is kind of a universal experience.
Yeah.
Interesting. So Wojtek, when you're working with candidates that are potentially going to work for you, when does their experience start with you and how do you try to make that better for them?
I think the earliest in my previous company, I had one of the candidates who actually started by seeing a talk by our previous CTO at one of the conferences more than a year before he applied. And that was really surprising for me, how important it is, how everyone sees the company, even in the community, on conferences, different events, and that's not even immediate. So this is what I would probably start, just like you guys, pretty early, whenever they meet the brand. And right now in Codility, this is really surprising because a lot of candidates already have filled Codility tests, and surprisingly, they know a lot about the product because they used to apply to other companies and use the product. So that's a pretty good recognition right there.
I'm so glad you brought up that they saw the CTO because I think in most experiences that I've had, there's one really significant event that happens for a candidate that kind of makes them, or a human, that makes them go, ooh, I want to work there. What kind of significant events do you hear about more often or most often as an influence to apply? I'll give that to Brian or Ellie.
Well, I tend to think that candidates apply for any number of reasons. One of the reasons that I keep hearing a lot about from candidates when I say, what's motivating you to consider making a change, is they feel like they're not experiencing any growth. That if they're going to make a move, they don't want to make a lateral move. They want to make a move into an organization that's really going to empower them. Sorry, I don't mean to be losing my voice. I must have been doing too much yelling and screaming at source code. But what I'm really experiencing with candidates is that what is provoking them to make a move is that they want to be in an environment where they're challenged sufficiently and where they can grow in a professional capacity. And I've got to be able to find a way to afford them that opportunity to do so if they come to RentPath. And if it isn't an opportunity where they're going to grow their skill set, I've got to have a very candid conversation with them and say, as passionate as you might be about what it is that we do, this is an instance where you're not going to grow professionally. You're going to be bored. You'll be looking for another job in 60 to 90 days.
Yeah. Wojtek, are you hearing that with
I would add.
Yeah, go ahead, Ellie.
Just making sure that we're promoting who we are and what our culture is from the beginning, and making sure that people know that if you are interested in namely, you're going to be able to have a life outside of work, you're going to be able to have other interests. So that's another thing that I think attracts people to our brand.
Yeah. Wojtek, is this what you're hearing from technical candidates?
Well, I have this one story actually. I used to organize a pretty big conference around Java, and a lot of attendees. I had over 600 attendees there, so I really wanted to see how do they recognize sponsors and whether those companies are visible and which companies and why, to understand that, to have better sponsorship packages next year. And I was really surprised because I asked attendees after the conference which companies did they remember being at the conference and maybe where would they apply afterwards. And I was super surprised because a lot of them mentioned companies who weren't even sponsors at all. those were companies of the people who were leading talks and workshops. They actually recognized most of the companies by the content, by the technical content, and they saw like, wow, this is a great guy. I want to work with that person. Can I apply? Are you hiring? Right? And they thought like these companies were involved in the conference in other ways. So from that year on, I was strongly suggesting to everyone to actually submit a strong technical content for developers.
I love that. You know, I think learning.
Katrina, can I follow up on that? Would you say that like where do conferences and making sure that you've got speakers at conferences, where does that fall in source of hire for you and the team at Codility?
Sorry, didn't get that.
Oh, I was wondering, you know, if you're sponsoring the speakerships at conferences and you're delivering that content, you're building community, how do are conferences a major source of hire for your team at Codility?
Well, actually, we just hired a developer engineer because we couldn't get actually to quite as many events with technical content as we wanted to, actually. And we just hired a person to help us being more visible and submit to more conferences. So I think that will improve. But me personally, I always like to share my knowledge in different on different events and even organize different parties, but try not to sell the company as a thing, but try to pick the best areas of my own knowledge and try to get people interested. If they like the idea, they usually come following this knowledge. They want to learn more.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I never thought about sending technical leaders into a dedicated amount of conferences so that I would be able to recruit technical talent. Have you guys ever thought about that or done that yourself?
So I've
It's a good idea.
I've read the case study from Google that like their head of engineering is their #1 recruiter. Because when he goes to conferences, people come up to him and speak to him afterwards. He gets their information and then he turns it over to the hiring team based on who it is that kind of really impressed him or who stood out to him. I think there was an article. I feel like there was an article on Business Insider about it, maybe about 2 years or so ago. Like meet Google's #1 recruiter, and it was actually their CTO.
Wow, I love that. You know, I'm not terribly surprised that learning is kind of the #1 thing, because we recently did a poll where we kind of stack ranked healthcare, pay, all of those things, and learning has very consistently come out as on top as a key differentiator of a company, right? Where pay, salary is usually about the same, health benefits, but that learning is very consistently either very strong, like very influential in their decision. So how might you add learning naturally into the candidate experience to kind of show that value from your company?
So if I can go first on this, and this is not to plug Codility, but like it works perfectly with what we're trying to do, is that when we have a conversation with a candidate and we say, we want you to take this code challenge, it's only going to last an hour. And we want you to specifically look at one of the languages, let's just say React, right? We're asking somebody to take this challenge so that they can show us not only what it is that they know, but so they can show us what we don't know. Because as much as we talk about learning and development of individuals that are coming into the organization, we also have to think about whether or not this person coming into the organization themselves can be a teacher. Do they have the potential to really mentor other developers, other engineers? And that's something that we've used the test to identify, but that's also something that we've used the test to kind of isolate and figure out where the opportunity would be making this hire if somebody's done something on the test that we've never seen before, that our minds have been completely blown. How do we make sure that that's part of the candidate experience, that when they come here, they're doing the teaching, they're teaching our teams, they're teaching us, they're enriching us through that process.
Absolutely.
And creating that level of empowerment is awesome. That's one of my favorite things about our process.
So can I ask one follow-up on that? So talk to me. I'm going to ask lots of follow-ups. I'm the host. But I'm curious what kind of reporting you're getting that you're actually able to identify anomalies like that. Because from my understanding, most assessment platforms don't go into that level of detail.
So
It's like,
one of the things that takes place with Codility that we really like is that it will identify if somebody has typed the same exact code as somebody else, right? So if you will, I'm not saying it's cheat proof, but there's a way for it to identify people who have just kind of used the internet as their resource. Also, we're able to see in real time how it is that this person codes. So when our team leads kind of take a look, not just at what the score is that somebody got, because the scoring is important, but what really is important here is being able to walk through what that person's thought process was and go, wait a minute, I wouldn't have done it that way.
mm-hmm.
I would have, and when they come in, we will say, well, why did you use these brackets here instead of kind of using this code base to establish a like button or to a non-like button, or I don't want to go too big into what it is that we test for, but it's really exciting to kind of see these engineers like gather around a computer and say, can you show me what you were thinking here? And we've already kind of seen what it is that they did from a code perspective, and it further validates who they are and the ability that they've got to be a mentor to others on the team, which is really also important to us.
Absolutely. So Wojtek, why don't you contextualize some of that from a technical perspective? So what's the vision on that? Why build it that way? And why have that kind of report at the end?
Right. So first of all, I'd say that if you want to give this learning experience to a candidate, the most important part will be the on-site itself or the interview itself. So in Codility, you have a code like which lets you talk to a candidate, but then you manually actually aggregate. You have all of the learning points that you can then share. This is what we do. We share all of that with the candidates so that they can improve. I'd say the one question we ask ourselves, if that candidates want to reapply in 6 months or 12 months to us again, what do they have to improve so that they can pass better, right? But going to the screening phase, if you want to have the result, I used to actually join one of the companies that used Codility, just having this threshold and only sharing not sharing the report back then, but only telling to the candidates like, sorry, you didn't score enough points, you didn't get enough points, so you're rejected, and that's it. And I think that's a terrible experience. So I changed that to actually first sharing the report and then adding also the information, why is it important for us. But also if someone doesn't agree with the score or have different reasons, then definitely please come back to us so that we can reopen that, because automated test isn't always perfect.
Absolutely.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point.
Ellie, how about you? How do
Adding
you bring
on to that,
learning?
Yeah, we've just rolled out a 3-part interviewer training for our engineer interviewers. A lot of them don't have very much experience in interviewing, and one of our focus was teaching them the questions to ask and the processes to walk through to really, first of all, learn from the thought process, but also teach the candidate what it's like in working at a team at Namely. And so during the interview, we promote that it's more of a team environment working together to solve this problem rather than just watching the candidate do that. So that's something that we've been promoting in our interviewer training.
What else do you have in that interviewer training? If somebody on the line wanted to build one, what are kind of 2 things that must have and 2 things that you probably, or anything that you were like, nope, this doesn't belong here?
Yeah, first of all, the basics of how to use our ATS. It's amazing the hiring managers not knowing where to go to find these little details. So definitely that. Legal, we had legal come in and talk about the questions that you can and cannot answer, because a lot of people that are going into interviews don't realize these small specific things that you can't go into. And then how to really dig deep. First answers in interviews aren't the best answers. You got to keep digging, and follow-up questions are crucial. So that's the 3 things that we're focusing on. not focusing on, we've only done one round of it, so we still got to look at our feedback.
Awesome. So, all right. So in this candidate experience, we've talked about some of the ways that you can kind of infuse a certain message and evolve your candidate experience. How do you know it's working? So how can you measure, or what numbers along the way have you used to measure an improvement in candidate experience over time? I'll let anybody go for that one first.
So I'm gonna be quite honest and say right now, this is something that we're working on building because we want to make sure that candidates are having a great experience. Part of the process that we're putting together right now, and this comes straight from the playbook of Gary Crispin, is we're surveying our candidates after their interview process to tell us what they liked, what they didn't like, what could we have done better, and where there were communication breakdowns. Because we've isolated based on Glassdoor that some of those are the areas where we've really not been able to excel. So, you know, Katrina, I know we want to talk about fixing things and things that are broken. We've taken a situation or a circumstance where things were broken, and we've really tried to start rolling out what the fix is going to be for that.
I like it. How about you, Wojtek? You know, I think you sit in a unique place, right? I think you really understand kind of the influence and how everything plays in. But as a hiring manager, how do you know that your candidate experience is good or bad?
Right, so I think the important number that we track as a Codility, because we usually don't see what happens then to candidates later in the hiring process. So it's hard for us to actually get this kind of data right now. So we focus on the dropout rate in the whole screening phase. As a technical recruiter, I actually try to ask a lot of candidates after the whole experience, especially those who were rejected, because it's easier to get some feedback after someone joins the company. But for those who are rejected, we try to ask them for any feedback. Are they satisfied? Was the feedback actionable for them? Because it always should be.
Yeah.
But I don't have any numbers on that. We don't quantify that, but we go on a case by case through all of the candidates to learn something from that.
Yeah. Is anyone using NPS or any of kind of the promoter score? Would you do this again? Kind of ratings? I use it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Well, Katrina, help me out, because we're building the system. For those people who don't know what a net promoter score is, you know, what is it? Why does it matter? When have they been exposed to it? And is it easy? Is it difficult? What's going on there?
Okay, so NPS is probably the most simple metric that you could possibly use to calculate an approval. So NPS comes from the marketing world. It's a net promoter score, like Brian said, and it's usually a ranking between 1 and 5, 5 being, or 1 being awesome, 5 being not so awesome. You can decide those dynamics. If you just look up NPS, they'll show you how to calculate it. It's an average of all of your scores. The reason that I think it's so great is because it's a very balanced approach, right? You can take each part of your process and infuse it in, but it's one question. Would you do this again? Would you recommend it to a friend, right? And so that's a real truth test in today's kind of like peer-to-peer economy, which I really think we're moving into, where people trust each other more than they trust information from anywhere else. And so what I've been doing recently with a client is that we actually ask NPS at every step. So as they complete the application, we have a quick pop-up. Would you recommend this to a friend? Just click the button, it's done. There's no big survey. There's no, would you like to take the survey? We just prompt. And then when they finish the interview, we send them an email, embed the NPS into the email when we do the interview follow-up. When we do the scheduling follow-up, every time there's a follow-up, there's an NPS in there, because then you're able to gauge how happy people are at every little piece. And like I said, it's really easy to calculate, because you add it all up and you divide it by how many people, and you get your score. Or how many of each answer, right? So it's like, If you Google it, I promise you can get all the math. Math isn't my thing, but I can tell you that it's great data. We actually have our first question from the audience. Jacob, thank you so much. And he has a question about when you infuse an assessment. So he specifically asked, do you ask candidates to complete a Codility test before anyone at your company speaks with them?
So we do not. So the way that our process works is, thanks for the question, Jacob. What we're going to do is we're going to have a pre-screen with the candidate. We're going to talk to the candidate about what they're passionate about, what they're doing. We're going to kind of ask them some questions. Again, I'm going to use React as an example, about how they're using React and other JavaScript libraries. And then after sharing those notes with the hiring manager, if we feel that that person is going to be a fit for the role, then we say, look, we've got a short code assessment. It's going to take you about an hour or so to complete. Put the ball in the tee, explain to them what they're going to do, that they're going to have 72 hours to complete it. And after they complete it, more than likely, they're going to have a face-to-face interview with our team here. So that's how we introduce Codility into the process. And then typically we're looking for people who have scored above 50%. We review even though the test is automated in terms of its grading, we review every test by a member of our team. One of our tech leads or one of our software managers reviews that test just to make sure that everything's working properly. And then after that, we invite the candidate in for a face-to-face interview. It's typically a panel with about 8 members of the code team to really get down into what's taking place there. And then after that, we make an offer. I guess I just gave our process when you were asking me, hey, Brian, when you insert the assessment.
Not before they talk to anyone is the answer.
Yeah, they've talked to me, and they've talked to me, but then usually I'm the only person from the company they've spoken to before they take the Codility.
Is there ever
We
a
have the
scenario
same system as you, Brian.
Yeah. So for both of you, is there ever a situation in which you would say, yes, somebody should take the code test before they speak to anyone? Or is it you really need to contextualize that with a human?
So I think that you need to contextualize it, and I think that it's part of creating a great candidate experience. If I'm asking you to do something, I want to. So I try to run a very transparent process with candidates, always letting them know where they stand in the process, like every 48 hours. Katrina, we were talking about how great Gmail is. I use timers inside of Gmail to make sure that I am communicating with a candidate every 48 hours, whether I've heard something, whether I haven't heard something, so that no 2 days go past, so that there's that transparency. So when I'm giving them the code challenge, the only thing that I'm not doing is sitting there and reviewing the questions with them before they take it. I'm letting them know, I'm giving them specifically, actually, I can tell you, I have, in the event that I am not here suddenly tomorrow or something, or I got hit by a bus, I've got written out exactly what it is that I say to candidates to make sure that we're all on the same page when we're handing out the Codility challenge. And that is, once you start the challenge, you have 60 minutes to complete it. The code assessment is a mix of unique multiple choice and open source coding questions. Basic JavaScript knowledge is only necessary to take the test. The dev console will be the key for debugging, and there are a total of 3 sections, each containing 10 questions that must be completed to the React section, and you can use any source to finish this work. Is there anything else I can share with you? And then I also follow up with an email that includes the Codility link, so that they're sufficiently prepared for what we're going to do and how we're going to do it.
What do you think, Wojtek, as like a technical candidate, right? Before they talk to someone, after they talk to someone, what's the best process?
Yeah, I admit, actually, I have a pool of candidates that I'm just starting with information and a test. The recruiter starts with that. And usually we're doing that for candidates who just sign up for the role without any recommendation. And then just after the CV screening, it looks like there is no match between that candidate and the role pretty fast. But sometimes, very rarely, it happens that someone just didn't work too much on the CV and they didn't expose the right skills for the role. So I want to still give them the chance to solve the test because I could be surprised. But there's very little chance, so I'm just trying to save some time with just sending them the test directly.
Wojtek, I'm curious, like when you give the test to them directly, what's the drop off?
Well, it's pretty big, and from definitely that could be the cause because no one had spoken to them, but also I assume because they apply to a lot of roles. So whichever actually requires a homework or a coding task, this is why they usually drop out as well from the process, because it's difficult if they apply to like 20 or 40 companies to see what is the result, and they get a lot of links to tests or other homeworks longer even. They have to focus only on the companies they really want to apply to.
Got it.
Interesting.
But it's really hard for me to measure for that. So there is also a risk that I'm losing good candidates in that group because I haven't called them or contacted them before.
Interesting, interesting.
We just got a comment that I would love to hear kind of all of your reaction to. So they suggested that you put a link to a Codility challenge in your job description. So it's a little carrot that says, we'll move you to the front of the line if you go ahead and take this challenge. All right, I'm watching the responses. Some people are like, other people, yeah, not so much. I want to hear from you first, Ellie. What do you think, as kind of the owner of candidate experience, about putting an assessment right into a job description?
My first comment is we're so focused with the recruiter tech screen, or excuse me, the recruiter screen, in terms of looking to make sure that anyone we bring on site or move forward to the tech portion is a culture add. And I don't know. I would have to think further about the pluses
Ellie,
and
let's say it's your
minuses of
job.
that, because it would.
Let's say it's your job. Would you take the assessment before you applied?
No. But I'm also not in tech, so it could be a different answer.
What do you think, Brian?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of so you know me, I'm a little bit of a showboater. So like if somebody said, here's a link and here's a challenge, I would be like, yo, let's get this party started. I would jump into it. I think that's definitely a pretty interesting carrot. However, to my knowledge, I don't know that Codility is set up to work like that. I'm going to point down and say to the gentleman who is right below me on the screen, could I even do that with Codility?
So, well, actually, Codility has this idea of sponsored challenges and code challenges that you actually can source candidates or send a challenge to potential candidates, actually just challenge attendees, right? Not even your candidates, but you treat it as a source for other people. And actually, there's a lot of developers not even applying for the job, but taking a part in a challenge because they're just curious, they're for learning experience, they want to discover that. And some of them actually end up applying for the job, trying to find out more about the company. So I think that having a link on the job description anywhere online is a really good move when I think about it right now for some of the companies, thinking about developers as a community with large amount of introverts for whom it's difficult to actually make the direct contact, but they would love to follow up the link to see the challenge and maybe do some coding because it doesn't require any interaction just yet. It's not. It doesn't require any confirmation from them that they are actually interested in the job. They can just do some coding beforehand, and if they do really well, it's easier for them to be at this part of an interview process.
I would love to see, and I don't know if this exists now. Oh, did we lose him? Ah, there's it. Okay, I was like, where'd it go? I'd love to see something where, so we talked about how influential the speakers are, where a speaker could put up a slide that was like, text your email address to 12345, and we'll send you a coding challenge to come work at our company, right? To take advantage of that moment. I just saw Wojtek like, no, but I think that'd be a really interesting recruitment marketing model, right? Because we know that they're really influenced by speakers. So how do we take advantage of that like moment of action? Just plug. I'm talking to the CTO. I'm so like, hey, can we do that?
Yeah, that would be great, especially if you could track the results. If you would definitely require some of the analytics in place to try that and measure that. That would be really important. But all that sounds like a really good idea, definitely.
Yeah, like campaigns almost. So it's like CRM meets assessment. All right, now my nerd, the nerd wheels are going.
Some of the Codility customers actually use challenges to go to different events and put it on their booth, asking different developers just to take part in that challenge, right? But if you would like to use that in any other way, but it will still require to measure that, to compare that with having them first in your regular pipeline to see how the funnel compares this way.
Absolutely. So we just got our first Twitter question. So this one is about getting feedback from candidates who have chosen to go to another company. So how do you take feedback from a candidate who decided to pick another job?
Definitely take it to heart. Where I've found that, and I will ask candidates that I've worked with and said, look, we've built a relationship. I'm not trying to guilt trip you. I'm not your mother. I'm not your grandmother. That sounds canned. I may have said it before. Can you help me to understand what we could have done better to be more competitive in this marketplace? I've heard everything from, your recruiting process is great. I wish that the offer had been more. I've heard, I was turned off by the fact that we kind of do like a hackathon challenge that takes place on site during part of the interview. And I've used that information and I've gone back to different members of the team, those team leads and those individuals that have been part of the team that have been responsible for the interview, to see if those are things that we can make changes with so that we can make the process either more, really just testing it to see how susceptible it is to feedback, seeing how much we have to do to realign our process, or if we're content with keeping our process and our salary bands where they need to be for the talent that's in the marketplace.
Absolutely. How about you, Ellie? You're the candidate experience owner.
Yeah, I don't have those conversations with candidates over the phone just because the recruiter handles that. But when I do get those emails that say I'm no longer interested in coming on site, just making sure to thank them for their interest in Namely. And again, like Brian said, just see if there's anything that went wrong throughout the process that could have been changed.
Absolutely.
Right. So, and as for me, I really think, because I'm going here in the case-by-case scenario, but basically I'm trying to talk to those to every single candidate to understand in which way they want to grow, what they want to learn, and sometimes I even end up like, I would love to hire you, but this is not the right place for you because you wouldn't be able to evolve in that way. But on the other hand, I actually had this twice in my life, that someone chose another company and I was super convinced that my company, this team would be the perfect place. So I went the extra mile to explain that to them, to give it another try, to talk to us more, to understand what I can see right now. And one time it even happened that someone already had the signed contract with another company and had, like, I think 2 weeks to start there. And this person decided to cancel that contract and to choose my team, and that was super important. And After I think 2 years, I've spoken to him, and he was so happy that I actually kept on talking to him and convincing him, because he had a great journey in that company.
Absolutely. So we're coming up to the end of our time, and I want to give anyone who's on the line a chance to ask any more of their questions. But I want to wrap with a question about failure. So many of these webinars are all about how great you are and how everything you've done has totally worked. But we all know that there are moments when things go wrong, right? When things just aren't working. So I want to talk about something that you've changed in your candidate experience, that you were really proud of that just wasn't working. And we can go round robin on this one since it's our last one.
I'm happy to start with this one. We just rolled out a bunch of new employee resource groups at Namely, and we wanted to somehow get that part of the interview experience and just make candidates aware that we have these ERGs. So we made a one-pager in the interview request or the availability request form saying, if you're interested in any of these 5 ERGs, we would love to connect you with someone at Namely that's part of this ERG so that you can have a 5-minute coffee break with them during your interview. It just backfired. We spent a lot of time prepping on this, a lot of time prepping our ERG people at Namely about what to talk about, and no one signed up. So still trying to think about ways to go about that, because we do think it's really important to bring that into the interview process, but something that we failed at, but are going to keep going and try to figure out a way to get that part of our process.
Boys?
I think that one of the areas that we've been most proud about is that we didn't have everybody kind of on the same page as to what needs to take place from a candidate coordination perspective. So we made sure that we had a designated coordinator that would be responsible for ensuring that every on-site takes place in the same way, in the same manner, that people were not running late to interviews, if you will. That was a big problem for us, and we would have candidates kind of sitting in rooms for about 10 minutes, and that was a big failure. So we've actually automated the process through Slack so that people are getting their Slack notifications, letting them know in advance where they need to be, and we're making sure that before we sit the candidate in the room that we've got the interview teams there.
I sat in a room for over an hour once waiting for someone to come, and I jokingly said to them I thought it was part of the test.
All right, and may I add to that, we try to make sure that everybody on the interview panel, we say, if you see this candidate sitting in this room alone and you walk by and someone's supposed to be in there, just pop in and say, hi, I'm Ellie on the recruiting team. Great to have you on site. It's a simple thing that makes sure they know that we care, that they're there.
So for me, it's really hard to choose just one, because there were so many things I've done wrong so far. But I think the most important, and I'm really proud of that, I really give honest feedback every single time. And that was really difficult, especially for technical people, because we all try to always be really nice to candidates. And sometimes this evaluation might be pretty harsh, and we always want to be positive. So the feedback used to be very vague and not really actionable. So this is what we improved, like focusing on something that the candidate can do to be better next time.
Absolutely. And I know I said that was last question, but the questions are starting to pour in. You say last, and people are like, oh, me. So how do you make your business understand that candidate experience is important? So Ellie, you talked a lot about like training your teams and like doing coaching, is that part of it? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And just making sure that everyone at Namely is part of interviewing. So that comes into as referrals. You can help build namely, and that's pretty cool. And training, going over, you walk in, you shake their hand, you give them their business card, you offer you ask them if they need a restroom break, coffee, water, just to walk around. Simple things like that are important to go over. You forget that interviewers are also nervous. It's not just the person that's interviewing, because interviewing is hard. Interviewing the person is hard. So just making sure you know those details.
All right, last answer, Fink. Let's hear it.
Actually, we've got a very similar process to Ellie. We particularly go through it with our newer managers or newer team members who haven't sat on an interview before, to make sure that they remember what it was like, make sure that they're delivering that kind of consistent experience around the organization.
Absolutely. All right, so on that note, we really are at time, unfortunately. So as to not hold everyone here past their expectations, I just want to thank Codility again for making this conversation possible and bringing together all these really smart people so that I could talk to them. And I hope that you will go check out Codility. I think, clearly they have some cool features, and they're building some even cooler ones, because we got the brains over here. Like I said, thanks everybody, and thanks to these amazing panelists for being here. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.